My name is Brian Gomez, and I'm the design director at Vatra Games in Brno, Czech Republic, and I'm working on Silent Hill Downpour for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. I've been a game developer for 15, going on 16 years. I've got a long history of working in horror games. My very first game was Thrill Kill, the infamous, super gory, ultra-violent fighter that was so nasty it was actually banned before it was released. I've since worked on games like Evil Dead Fistful of Boomstick. I was a script writer and script doctor on Alone in the Dark. I co-created Clive Barker's Jericho with a friend and mentor, Clive Barker, who I worked with for several years, and that is pretty much how I found myself in Silent Hill. As the name Downpour probably signifies, water plays a really important role in Silent Hill Downpour. When we were creating our central character, Murphy Pendleton, we were looking for themes and motifs that we could work into his personality and try to figure out his inner psychology and figure out ways that we could transfer that psychology into a physical form in the other world. Murphy is a mutable character. He's changeable. He's been influenced by some negative forces in his life, and it sent him down some wrong paths. And he's also got a duality to his personality. He's a caring family man, but he's also got a dark side. And we thought water was a perfect element to illustrate that. Water, it's mutable, it's changeable, it could take the form of whatever vessel you put into it, or put it into. And it's also got a dark side. As we've seen, water is not only life-giving, but it can be incredibly destructive. So we used rain and water as the central theme to build our other world. So as you explore Silent Hill and you explore our dark environments, you're going to find that it may start out with something really simple. It might just be water dripping from a leaky pipe. It might be something like an overflowing toilet. But as the water starts entering the environment and the water level starts getting stronger, basically what you're starting to see is the encroachment of the other world. So it's a signal to the player that they're starting to get close to one of the other world segments. When you're walking around outside in the exterior sections of the town, which tends to be a much more free-roaming experience around a large Silent Hill town area, the weather actually changes dynamically. So as the storm clouds start to gather and that ubiquitous fog that we all know and love from Silent Hill is getting thicker, the rain starts to fall, and maybe it's just a light drizzle at first, but then it starts getting heavier and heavier. And basically the worse the weather gets and the more water starts falling, the more danger Murphy finds himself in. So as Murphy's own mental state starts to deteriorate, the weather starts to reflect his own mental state deteriorating, and thus Murphy's inner demons start manifesting in a physical form. So basically when you're walking around Silent Hill and it starts to rain, you better get some shelter. In Silent Hill Downpour, you're going to get the opportunity to explore a previously unseen corner of the town. It's going to be an area that's 5 times larger roughly than any other scene or area that you've ever seen in a previous Silent Hill game. Now when we went about exploring the environments and figuring out what levels we wanted to build, we wanted to find areas of the town that would make the player feel most vulnerable. So we went into our own past memories and we tried to identify places that made us feel the most vulnerable and made us feel like we were the most threatened. So we looked at things like horror movies, horror fiction, comic books, things like that, and we identified some of the places that tend to come up in the genre quite a bit. Places like deserted subway stations or deserted classrooms at night. I mean, some of your worst childhood memories probably took place in a classroom. So you'll start to see environments like that creeping into this Silent Hill. Areas like movie theaters, deserted bathrooms, places like that, we managed to work into all of our levels. We also wanted to explore the duality of Silent Hill as a resort town. See, if you know the background of the town, if you're a normal person and you don't have a lot of guilt or sins weighing on your conscience and you go to Silent Hill, you'll find that it's actually a really charming New England lakeside town. But if you go there and you have a lot of guilt and sin pressing on you, it's quite a different place. But we wanted to see what happens when you take those charming little lakeside towns features and put it through the other world and see what happens when you get the dark version of the town. So in this game you're going to be able to explore places like the boardwalk along the lakeside, and one of the major tourist attractions previously unseen is called Devil's Pit. Devil's Pit is a massive underground cave system with a huge drop-off that Murphy gets to explore in quite a lot of detail, and it also gets to get into the coal mining history of Silent Hill, so you have a little bit of the dark, creepy mines as well to explore. So whether you like the happy seaside or lakeside resort side, or you're after more of the other world, we hope that as Murphy's Guides you'll find some part of Silent Hill that inspires you. Like all great Silent Hill games, of course Silent Hill Downpour is going to feature multiple endings. Murphy is a guy that has done some bad things in his life, and he knows what he's done that sent him to prison, and he also knows what it is that sent him to Silent Hill. But as the player, it's going to be your job to figure out what is it that's troubling Murphy, and why is he going through this extreme form of psychotherapy that we call Silent Hill. Depending on certain key moral decisions that you help Murphy make throughout the game is going to determine which ending you get. I won't tell you how many endings there are, but there's more than just a few of them. And depending on the actions that you have Murphy take in the game will determine which ending you get to see. So at the end, you may get a happy ending where we realize that Murphy's just a poor, troubled anti-hero that's maybe made a few mistakes. Or you might learn that there's an even darker side to Murphy that you didn't even see coming. And of course, for those completionist fans out there, there might even be a tongue-in-cheek joke ending hidden in there somewhere if you're really diligent and look for it. Developing Silent Hill Downpour in the Czech Republic was an experience that I was totally unprepared for. I'm a Los Angeles native, and I've traveled around Europe, but I had never been over to Eastern Europe before. It's 27 hours door-to-door from where I live in Los Angeles over to Vatra's studios, so it's a long way to travel. And when I got there, I found that this was actually, the Southern Moravian region is actually home to some of the most beloved stories that I have from horror fiction. The vampire, Gollum, lots of stories about witchcraft and ghosts. A lot of that folklore actually comes right out of that region. Within driving distance of Vatra Studios, for example, is Elizabeth Bathory's castle. Those of you that are into vampire fiction know that Elizabeth Bathory was the famous blood countess that sacrificed thousands of virgins so that she could bathe in their blood. This is a countryside that is steeped in that kind of horror folklore. And these guys that I work with at Vatra have grown up with these stories their entire lives. This was their bedtime stories. So I felt really confident that the Czechs could definitely pull off horror. And the whole atmosphere around our studio in Brno totally feeds into that. I mean, if you don't get off of our train that takes us to work and you go one stop too far, you end up at the crematorium. If you walk across the street, you'll find that the studio sits right beside a massive Eastern European cemetery. And if you've never been in an Eastern European cemetery, I highly recommend it. It is a creepy place. So the guys at the Vatra studio are totally surrounded by a horror atmosphere 24 hours a day, and that just totally helped us create Silent Hill Downpour. Vatra is a multinational studio. Now, of course, being based in the Czech Republic, a lot of our teammates are homegrown. But we also have people from all over the world that have come to work on Silent Hill and be a part of this great franchise. So besides myself being an American, we also have our writer, Tom Waltz, who's an excellent writer who worked on the really popular Silent Hill graphic novels. We got American composer Dan Licht, who you might know from the Dexter series. We've got him on board as well. We've also have several developers representing the UK, Germany, Russia, South Africa even. So we have quite a few people, a very diverse studio, and those people have all brought their own mythologies and their own folklore that they've grown up with and added that sort of to the DNA of our game. And I think it's really going to come through when you see the various side quests and the different subtle nuances of our story. Now, there was some controversy early on because Downpour wasn't being made by a Japanese developer. But if you look at the entire history of horror fiction, the Japanese have definitely carved out their own niche. They've definitely put a new spin on it and reinvigorated horror at a time when, in the West, in America, we were sort of fixated on serial killers with Freddy Krueger and Jason and things like that. While we were making those slasher films, Japan was making really smart, intelligent psychological horror. Movies such as the original Ringu. I once asked Clive Barker, what's the scariest movie you've ever seen? And he handed me a DVD of a film called Audition. And I've never been the same since. I've never seen any film like Audition ever since that. So the Japanese definitely know horror. But if you look at the whole wide breadth of horror, you'll find that some of the earliest surrealist and expressionist films that came out of Europe created some of the hallmarks of Japanese horror. So the use of contrasting lighting, light and dark, and the use of shadows and the starkness of the environments. A lot of that got its start in European early cinema. Things like the Frenchman Jean Cocteau's films or the original silent Nosferatu from Germany. A lot of that imagery, if you go back and look at those early films, have made their way into Japanese cinema. So the Japanese have definitely put their own totally unique spin on it, which we all adore. But I think you'll find that the Europeans can also do horror. And I think you're going to see with Silent Hill Downpour, may not be a Japanese take on the series, but it's definitely going to be unique, and hopefully it's going to scare the hell out of you.